Test, test.
All right. We're thin, at least class. I don't know about waistlines given the holiday times, but at least for class tonight we're thin. Kind of waited a few minutes here to get started, but it is 7:04, so we will not delay any longer. There's still people pulling up, so I know it's been a busy day for everybody, with everything going on, so hopefully a few more people will drop in here before the end of services today. So we are still on Till Death Do Us Part, lesson 7 of the Marriage Matters book we've been going through. And we're going to continue on. Last time we talked about, we kind of talked just broadly, kind of in general, around some financial points of, just approaching it from a point of humility, from a point of hope, as well as recognizing that everybody has kind of messed up at some point or another along the way, but that God has a lot to say about money and about wealth and possessions, and so there's a lot we can learn from Him. We made it through the first, I think maybe we touched on the second of 7 biblical truths about money from Luke 19, verses 11 through 26, so we're going to go through the rest of those this evening, as well as kind of get into the questions. But one of the things I want to make sure we do a better job of, and maybe this is my job, I guess, as the facilitator, to make sure we do a better job of focusing on what this quarter is about, and this is about marriage. So while we're talking about finances, try to think of it through the lens of how finances impact our marriage and how our marriage can impact the way we view our finances, and kind of vice versa, back and forth on those things. But focusing on the marriage side of things rather than just the money side of things, which is sometimes where we kind of tend to go. And what we were doing a bit last time, Tom kind of provided a course correction there towards the end of class about focusing on being about marriage itself. The other thing, last time we talked kind of real abstractly about finances and some mistakes to avoid. Good conversation, lots of great conversation. I don't want you to think I'm downplaying the good class we had on Sunday, but one of the things I want to try and focus on more tonight is some more practicality. What does it look like? What does it mean, these things that we talked about? They're not just phrases or words, but what does that look like in practice? Because that's what we kind of seem to be missing on Sunday. I know last quarter with the kids class, the parenting class, we had a lot of good practical things to do. And so if we've got an opportunity here as we're talking through the financial side of marriage, talk about practical ideas, let's make sure we can bring those out. And I'll try and coax that out of you a little bit as well, and provide some practical comments as well. All right, we'll go ahead and get into the content. But before we do that, Randy, would you offer a quick prayer before we get started?
Good Father, we bow before you and give you our praise and thanks for the blessings that you bestow upon us each day. We're thankful for this holiday that we get to spend with families. For the most part, everyone gets to be off today, and we're thankful for that, and just the blessings of family that you give us, our marriages, our children, our extended families. We're thankful for these gifts. We pray that we would honor you and our families, and that we would be able to give you glory, Father. Thank you for your mercy, your forgiveness. We pray that you bless us as we study about this issue, this topic of marriage, and pray that you give us wisdom to apply the things that we talk about, to be willing to share and learn from one another, and most importantly, Father, learn from your word and learn how you would have us to treat one another and what we should learn from marriage. Pray you bless Maverick and all the teachers, and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, first biblical truth that we talked about last time was everything belongs to God. Kind of started out with an obvious one, right? I mean, this is kind of the foundational thing here, but I think it's pretty obvious and evident, not really something that I think we all know. I think we all recognize that. So the second one, and really B, C, D, and E as we go through this. So B being there are no secular, sacred/sacred distinctions. The third one, C, doing business God's way will set us at odds with the usual way. D, wise stewardship pleases God, and E, poor stewardship displeases Him. Those are all kind of, I'm having a hard time differentiating in a lot of ways between those four because they're all rooted in the first one, right? That it's all God. So so as we're going through these, I've got a few comments to make on each of those, but they're all just very similar with A, like I said, at the center. So I'm going to also work under the assumption that we've all read through the lesson. So I don't want to necessarily hash through point by point of the lesson. Kind of want to, maybe besides those that are visiting, Cole. But for those of us that are here, I assume we've read through the lesson. And so I kind of want to get back to those principles, those practical things as we're going through. And so the next one here, the point I want to make real quick on, I guess the question for the no secular or sacred distinctions that he makes. He pulls that out of verse 13 of Luke chapter 19. And so what does this mean? What does that mean for anybody? Any thoughts on what he's trying to get at here by making this point that there's no distinction between the sacred and the secular? So that would be between the worldly things and the godly things. Or
I think the writer's getting at that our money basically belongs to God, and that any decisions we make, whether secular or sacred, has a reflection on God and His way of how we should handle our money, because it's not ours, basically.
As I was reading through the notes that he made on here, I guess, is this something that we've ever considered this significantly, or this, do we recognize the significance, kind of the point that he's making here, right, where he says that, do we get a pass in the way we handle finances? I guess, not that I view it necessarily as, our money, meaning me and my wife's. It's still, I guess I've always kind of had the mindset of, I choose what to do with it. But a lot of this is challenging that mindset. Randy?
Yeah, I think Laura hit it on the head. It kind of really ties into that first one, because we can think, well, hey, we're going to, under the Old Testament, they tithe, and they gave to God first, give Him the first fruits. We'll talk about that probably more, but then the rest of it is mine, and I can do with it what I want. And that's really not the way the Bible sees it. Even if it is yours, how we should use it as an instrument, kind of for God's glory. We're not just going to spend it all on ourselves. While God wants us to enjoy those things, it is a tool. Just like I think Harvey talked about this on Sunday night. It's a resource, whether it's our energy, our time, our talents, our funds, whatever, our influence, all of that. If you can view that as it belongs to God, how I use it. So even if we don't use it for His glory, we're wasting that. So I don't know if that's what you're getting to.
Yeah, Rick.
I don't know if this is a perfect correlation, but I was thinking about for those of us who've either had allowances or use allowances for our kids. I've had both, and there's governance over what I allow my kids to spend. There is some reasonable amount of freedom, but there is you're going to give this much to God. You're going to save this much, and then the rest is for spending. And of course, there are certain things I would not let them spend on. Obviously, they're bad things, but there's a whole lot of freedom in that. And so in my mind, at least, I kind of think about what I'm trying to teach my kids, that there's expectations, and that hopefully they come through with, there's just a rote training of week after week after week for hopefully 18, 20 years of this is been given to me, but it's an allowance. I haven't earned this. This is just something that is a blessing given to me by mom and dad, and ultimately seeing money as a blessing given to them by God. That there are expectations. There are things that should be there. Is anybody putting a gun to their head? Well, no, not really. Mom and dad certainly have expectations if you want to continue to get that. So it's not a perfect correlation, but I think it does kind of speak to the idea of well, there are things that you should be doing with this. And there are things that you have some freedom in, and maybe a lot of freedom. But ultimately, what we want them to be thinking about is, if they were to come up at some point and say, Dad, I'd like to give more of what I spend than just what you're making me. Well, that would be a, wow, there we go. And that happens with God's people. The God used to have expectations in the old law. He intentionally didn't put those into the new law as far as you must give 10%. Plus, he said, I want you to give in a manner that reflects your heart. So there's an evolution, a progression of growth. And I think we need to think about our resources that way, that God genuinely wants to see what we want to do, what we're going to do with these things. He delights in that. Can we make some pretty rotten, selfish choices with that? Yes. But there are things that can be a reflection of that internal struggle of, I'd like to give more. How can we do that? He loves that. Or I want to do this for some other people. He loves that. And yeah, when we choose to do things for ourselves, that he's okay with that too, as long as we're, seeing to other things that he finds important. And so I kind of think of it in the same way, in the same vein of the allowance that I give my children, and that's very much how God kind of sees this too. I don't know if that's a striking correlation or not, but at least in my head it kind of works.
At that point about freedom, I think ties into his third point here about doing business God's way, that that'll set us at odds with the usual way. And one of the points he makes in that third point is around resentment, right? That the people resented the master's control over the money that they had, and we can sometimes maybe feel that way, and so just that idea of freedom, and that we think of freedom as the freedom to do anything and everything that we possibly could ever want. And I don't think that's an accurate way to think about the freedom that God gives us, right? And we're free to work within the bounds that are dictated. And that's the same thing with these guys, right? These guys that were given these minas, they weren't free to do whatever they wanted. Otherwise, they could pocket it. They weren't just given this money and said, hey, have, whatever. I'm going to come back, and if you have some, cool. If you don't, great. And no, there were bounds, there were restrictions. They were free to work and do whatever they could within those bounds. And that's almost more freedom than just the ability to do literally anything. Analogy I heard about this that I think fits really well. I know nothing about golf, but it makes sense. Where you can only be a good golf player if I go out on the golf course to play golf, I'm going to be awful because I don't know how to play I don't know how to put my swing within the bounds of what a proper golf swing is. I don't have the freedom to play golf because I can't hit the ball right, because I'm not restricting myself to the form required to hit the ball. Right? And does that make sense to everybody that yes, you're free on the course to do whatever you want, but you're not going to be any good at it. And so you have to restrict your actions to what a good form is in order to effectively hit the ball, right, and effectively play golf. And it's the same thing, I think, we can apply that principle literally to literally anything. I think you can apply it to finances as well, right? We can, yes, technically we're given the blessings from God, and we can do whatever we want with them. But if we want them to be the most effective and be used the most effective way, then we have to limit how we use them under the guise and the restrictions that God provides for us for those funds. Tom?
With sin, God gives us the free will to choose to serve Him or not to serve Him in that context. But with our finances, it's the same in one sense. We need to lay by and store and stuff like that. But so we have extra. Yes, we can spend it on what we want, but would it please God? Let's say I know someone in the congregation here is having some hardships and stuff like that, and I've got 50 pairs of tennis shoes in my closet and decide, you know what, I'm going to spend $500 and get this other thing, knowing full well that I could give this family some money to help them out. Which one would God want me to do? And is it really going to set me back if I don't get that 51st pair of shoes? Just an example of we're looking around about us, and if we see someone in need, we probably should use any extra money to kind of help that need. Maybe get more blessings for it.
Absolutely. When I started class tonight, I wanted to try and be more practical. We're still in the abstract. I don't know why I'm struggling to get down to the practical on some of this stuff. So if you have a practical comment around doing it God's way. And I think we've touched on all those things, but just trying to make sure that we were getting something, practical as well out of it. Questions, comments on B or C? I do want to try and get through these 7 and then get into the questions. I don't want to stop anybody from making a comment, though, so that way we can kind of talk a little bit more practically. Randy?
Well, one thing that kind of gets to practicality early on in marriage, you're kind of struggling to kind of build some equity and spoil the home and maybe acquire some furniture and things like that. But sitting down and talking, say, what's our goal in life? Certainly we want to have a home, start a family, maybe start putting things away for education, those kind of things. But ultimately, what is the goal? We talked the last time about trying to keep up with the Joneses and how it's easy to fall into that trap about just acquiring so that I can spend it on my pleasure. But what do we want to do with our lives? What do we want to do with our time and our energy, our resources? Is it about just accumulating enough to where we can take time off and travel and vacation and recreate? That can be what it is. If you get ahead, that's what you think you're supposed to do. But it's not just about acquiring so that you could give it all away. That might be, but maybe it's how am I going to spend my funds? What are we after in life? How do we advance the kingdom? It's not just having a budget, but having a spending plan. Where do we want our funds to go? It's not just about acquiring, and then we leave it all to our children. It becomes not a blessing to them, but kind of a curse. What do you want to do with the wealth that you accumulate in life? So thinking about that carefully, and how do you disperse that? And you think about it's not just the super rich that have to do this, the Bill Gates and Warren Buffetts of the world. It is what would we like to do in such a way that truly helps people? Because sometimes dumping money on them is not the kind of way that helps. It's just a negative. Right. But finding ways to use that creativity, and when you think of this as God's farm, I want to do something where it's establishing a school or something like that, or something that promotes people to grow on their own, helps them grow. That takes some thoughtfulness behind that. So even starting talking when you don't have anything, about what is the purpose of our, and so then then it's not just a budget, it is a plan. I like that, a spending plan. It doesn't limit your spending, it just defines it. How are we going to do it? We're going to put it where we think it does the most good. And that kind of developing that, I think, helps you with when it comes to what do you do with the excess.
Yeah, I like the reframing of budget versus plan. I think it makes it kind of frees you up a little bit to feel less restrictive. Nathan?
I think I agree with what Brother Randy said. I think sometimes it's hard for us to have it in our mind of sometimes the person wants to get to a certain level of net worth before they start thinking of giving to support God's work or giving to help the needy. But I think even during the point where you have nothing, you can still give, just like the widow's mite. It's more about your heart and the intent of what you have and what you are giving to support the work of God. So when you get to that point where you've amassed wealth, it doesn't become a stumbling block. It doesn't become an issue of you doing the same thing that God requires each and every one of us to give. Giving, whether you have little or you have much, we all can still exercise that benefits.
Yeah, very, very rarely does wealth multiply. Does it bring out, or power, which is really what money brings, bring out? It amplifies traits you already have. It amplifies things you're already doing. It doesn't bring out new traits necessarily, right? It doesn't bring out new habits. It just takes the things you're already doing and amplifies them. So if you're already being very tactical about the way you're using your money and being very giving and grateful, then it amplifies that. I got Rick, and then I got Jacqueline.
You were asking for some specifics versus some abstract. I don't say this at all to toot our own horn, but just to give an example. One of the primary goals we had, there were 2 goals we had when I decided to start working for the Portage schools. One was my daughter was going to need a car, and so we were going to need to do that. But the other was we had identified a number of friends and people that had needs that they were having trouble meeting from brethren from other congregations. And so we wanted to have more to be able to give. And so that was a decision about being tactical. That was a decision that, okay, here's what we want to do. Lord, if this is a good idea, bless this. As I wasn't sure, is that going to be a good use of my time or not? Well, he immediately facilitated all that. And we had several people that started coming to church because of that and visiting and listening in to our services. But it was a decision that we made that decision with the idea of we're going to have more. What is the purpose behind this? Well, we identified two purposes. One was very secular in the sense of it was about a vehicle, but the other was so that we have had, and God has given us a lot of opportunities to help people, which showed me that He took that seriously, that He took that as Rick, that was a good decision. And so trying to be specific about what we can do, we can identify and say, here's what we want to accomplish. Either we already have those resources and we're going to allocate them, or, well, we'd like to get more resources, not to blow on ourselves, but to try to help other people. And again, I don't say that at all to toot our horn, but just other people gave us that idea of working so that you have to give. Paul talks about that, and so that's just an example.
Yeah, that's good practical ideas and strategizing. It's not bragging, it's just saying what works and things that you've done that you've seen work. Jacqueline?
Let me start out by saying that I am not the financial person in our household, and it's because of Jeremy that we are almost debt-free. And I had nothing at all to do with that, because I am the spender in the family, and he is the one that saves and keeps me in line. But when there is a lot of times when there is someone who we see who's in need or stuff like that, a lot of times Jeremy and I will talk, and either I'll bring it up or he will, and we'll say, what can we go without this month? What can we give up, or what can we, or do we have the extra funds anyway to do this for someone else? And whereas for me, I'm the one who's always like, oh, our vacuum broke, we need to go buy one. And Jeremy's like, well, next month we can get a new one. And so, but when it comes to helping out people, we kind of come together as a team and try to come together as a team and work on it together. And even though he's in charge of the finances, we still talk through every decision and go through everything together.
Sure. All right. These next two, D and E, are related around wise stewardship pleases God and poor stewardship displeases Him. So maybe we'll do a little, contrast, compare and contrast here. But I do really like the point he made there on D around our attitude should be, Lord, the job you provided has given us this. Lord, you made this possible, and Lord, you have prospered us. I think we all recognize that that's what our attitude should be, but it's just a good framework when we are going through our finances, or we do receive that check every month, or whatever it looks like, that we can recognize, all right, this is yours. Thank you for giving this. Thank you for that, and that you made this possible. It's not my abilities; it's the abilities you gave me. It's just a different kind of framing. So this wise versus unwise. Any initial comments on wise versus unwise spending, or maybe examples of wise versus unwise spending that either you have maybe seen, although that gets hairy, so maybe that you have done. That way you're not pointing fingers at anybody except back at yourself of things you've done that are that you recognize are not good, or wise things that you're not looking to brag about necessarily, but just things that we can recognize. Nathan?
I think on a broader note, I think this is something that we all probably know too well. Trying to identify the needs from the wants is very key to marriage. Trying to work through their finances and everything, and sometimes everybody falls victim to if that is not really identified, we tend to maybe stray off a little bit into things that might be wants, might not be necessarily needs. And just like Brother Randy said, having some budget, just a basic budget plan and spend plan helps as you are going through those stages, so that you'll be able to identify the needs and the wants, and when the wants comes in and so forth and so forth. So as basic as it is, sometimes we fall victims to amassing the wants when it is not really needed at that time.
Yeah, and that's hard to parse out, right? The difference between a want and a need sometimes. Miss Joanne is kind of commenting here, but it's really easy to. I've talked about this here recently, that it's easy to rationalize things, right? That, yeah, I want this, but here's why I need it. You come up with all these reasons why I need it. You might not really need it, and you just want it. I know I have certainly made that mistake. I think we probably all have, rationalizing something that we don't necessarily need, but that we just want it, and so we come up with a reason why. Actually, this is a want and not a need. Ms. Joanne?
Well, I think something that can be a plague to you is we were on vacation, and they really pushed, okay, go see this house that you can go back to once a year, and then other times we will rent it out for you, and then you have to pay for the cleaning, and you have to pay another fee, and so it would amount to about $500 a month. And we didn't want any part of that, but we saw the house and we got a discount for doing that. But I also know of a relative that did that. They didn't go one time to that place, and so it was a bad judgment to enter into that. And so you've heard a lot on radio about how they can help you get out of that.
Timeshare,
and
yeah.
So, yeah, timeshare. I couldn't think of the right word. So I think more people are aware of that, and they don't make that mistake anymore.
Sure. Rick, you had something?
Yes, I did. I was thinking about tax time, coming up not too long, and how I remember when I was very young as a preacher, that the impulse would be when the tax money would come in, well, what can we blow this on? And there'd be lots of things that I say blow it on. There would be bills and things that would help, but then there was, fun stuff, planning for this and planning for that. And it took me a few years before I started realizing the first thing I need to be thinking about is what if this, goes back to God in terms of just my contribution, and then what if this needs to be used to glorify Him and helping other people, or being mindful of that. And that took me a while, and I'm still not perfect at it by any stretch of the imagination, but I was surprised at how a supposed man of God was struggling to think about those things. It takes a mindset, it takes training, even from good God-fearing families, for us to recognize the difference between what I would say was more poor stewardship on my part. I wasn't thinking at all, well, this is extra money. I've paid this and I've done that. And so the extra, I immediately was thinking, ooh, fun. But wait a minute, is that what's going to make God happy? Is that really going to be good stewardship? And so we as a family decided that was poor stewardship. We needed to work on training ourselves to think about, when we get something that's quote unquote extra, what is God's take of this? Not only in contribution wise, but also in being mindful of just other opportunities that may present themselves to serve in some way. And that has taken a long time, and it's something that's still easy to forget. I still, get extra and think, ooh, no, wait. Let's rein the horses in. And I think that's something that we all, because the rest of the world around us is telling us it's yours. You do what you want. And that's not what our Father is telling us. It's not what Jesus teaches us. And so I would offer that kind of as an example of poor stewardship. We get extra, and we don't think about how we can be useful with it for God.
Yeah, that really ties in with F, which is that it takes discipline, right? We've all kind of mentioned that, I think, in one way or another, that it's not easy. We have to be intentional and be disciplined about the way we make our money work for us. Question about the way unwise management versus wise management of money affects our marriages. Trying to tie this back to what the book is about marriage. And so obviously some, he mentions in here, he talks about Dave Ramsey's quote around paying the stupid tax. And, stupid tax is one thing if it's 1 month and you went and blew it and you bought a TV that you didn't really need, as an example. And that's one thing. That's a stupid tax you pay once and you can move on and kind of learn a lesson. Or there's the stupid tax if you buy a vehicle you can't afford and you get upside down in it and you're kind of stuck. And that's a long-term lesson you have to learn. So how do those negative things that maybe you don't fully think through or you rationalize, as we've been talking about, how do those affect the marriage, and how can we avoid? I think we've kind of talked about how we can avoid those, but any thoughts on how those negative or positive decisions can affect the marriage, and given that 75% of marriages are impacted by money in a negative way? What are any comments, thoughts, Randy? I can't tell.
Well, early on having this kind of discussion in marriage, how are we going to use credit? Those kind of decisions, talking through that together, learning to enjoy delayed, what's the word?
Gratification.
Yeah, delayed gratification, because sometimes the wanting and the looking and the working for it and hoping for it and not feeling like you have to start off with the fanciest car. And what kind of cars are we going to drive? Eric talked about how he wanted a Ferrari at one point. Now he wouldn't have one. You'd be embarrassed to even drive one, because there's some of those things that change as you get older and you recognize, I want something that gets me from here to there safely. And the status and all that kind of stuff that sometimes goes away with, or comes along with the lust of the eyes that the Bible talks about, wanting to everybody to see your well-being. Eventually you get to the point where I don't want people to know that. I would be ashamed to drive a car like that, because you're not looking for those kind of things. I think that happens as you grow older, but if you can talk those out and work through those desires and help one another hone to where it's not like we're looking to be wealthy, it's better to be the other way around. And then you make those kind of basic decisions. We're gonna avoid debt like everything we can, and we're going to invest. If we do use debt, it's going to be on things that appreciate in value. We're not going to go into debt on things like consumer value, things like TVs, anything that depreciates. Try to even avoid it on a car. Usually most of us have to do that initially on cars, but eventually learning, hey, cars are a bad investment. Learning how to use your money, being a good steward, and realize there's ways to save your way to wealth, but even investing in things that appreciate in value, learning together how to be good stewards. That's a fun thing, but the big one off is depriving yourself of that immediate gratification. We were talking about just this today. A child that has everything they want is miserable. They don't need to get everything they want at Christmas time or their birthdays. If they do, you're ultimately hurting them, because life is about the process, I think, and acquiring. And even if we give them everything, or we have everything, we'll find out that we're miserable. I truly think it is that anticipation, longing for, striving, working. And I'm not saying it's wrong to have what you want. I'm not, but just if we can learn that and you establish that as a couple early on and you're on the same page, you're better off. And I will take issue with one thing that Jacqueline says. Generally speaking, I think it's not the wives that are the big spenders. It is the guys. Guys are the ones that buy boats and I don't know.
I'm the big spender. She's the little nitpicky spender that adds up. But mine are the big. I need a $200 saw. I need the different. Okay.
Okay. Well, I think women, and I hate to characterize one another in big rocks, but there might be impulse buyers, a dress, something small. But guys like to spend the big things, and cars, trips, boats, that kind of stuff. But because women, I think, want security, and anything that might really deeply affect security is they're going to be more hesitant. So, guys, I put it on us, even though. But that's okay, Jacqueline. I don't mean to argue with you. Most of the time, us guys are the problem.
Randy, I think Lindsay had a comment next year.
I can't tie this into a moral or anything, but I had a story where I'm a big window shopper. I love it, and since I'm moving soon, I have everything packed away. So I have the bare bones in my room, and I've been living off it for like months now. And I went down to like look through my stuff, and I realized how much I don't need it. I found a full thing of like stuffed animals, and I'm like, I don't even remember half of these. So I just thought it was silly. Like, I bought it thinking I would cherish it and I would love it, but now I totally forgot about them because they're in a storage bin and I don't see them every day.
That's a good comment. Yeah, keeping the temptations out of sight too can sometimes be a good way to prevent some of that unnecessary spending. That shift in mindset from I make this much, therefore I can spend this much, you know, and kind of running right up to that limit of my income, as opposed to saying how, and maybe making it a game out of it might be fun too. How little can we live off of? How much? It's cool. Let's make as much as possible. That's fine. But how small can I drive that monthly required number down? And that might be a fun thing to do, especially as a young couple. We did not do that, just being very honest. We were not as responsible as we should have been when we first got married. And then we're better now, but definitely not perfect by any means. But it might be fun to try and drive that number down and see how small you can make that, because then you have that left over. That helps set you up for the future. That helps set you up just in general for savings and just different things you can do. Rick and then Randy.
Huge part of beginning of a marriage especially is sitting down and discussing how we view our contribution. I don't think that happens enough. I've met a lot of people who are young and they've never learned how to think about the money that they give to the Lord. Certainly when you get married, you need to be on the same page about, you know, how do you want to give. One of the things I love about my wife is she's always asking, you know, are we in a position where we can give more? And I love that. I admire her for that so much. She's always reminding me of those things. And anytime we do get raises or things like that, okay, well, what can we do? And that's you know, talking about the marital aspects, you want somebody who's on the same team you are, on the same vision of, well, let's think about how this glorifies God. And so, you know, picking somebody who is mindful of of that. And then once you have picked them, once you're in it together as a man, making sure that I don't just blow that off as all here she is asking about how much more can we give. No. We need to think about how much more we can put into this thing or that thing. And no, that's an important part of this, being a team about our contribution. And I know it sounds like a small thing, but in my experience in God's kingdom, that's one struggle that a lot of people have, is that their giving does not come close to reflecting their income. Now, that may be the proper appraisal of how much they appreciate God, which is another problem, but we have to make sure that our giving is that's actually a sacrifice. And if that person that we're with doesn't have that value, doesn't appreciate that, that's going to make it easier for us to skimp and cheat God. Whereas if somebody comes into it they have that attitude of, hey, can we give more? You know, can't wait for the next raise so that we can up our contribution. That is the kind of person you want to wrap your arms around and say, help me get to heaven. And I think that makes a huge difference in our marriages. So.
Connor, can you go give the 5-minute warning to everybody? Yeah. The bell's not working any longer. Some good advice I got early on, which admittedly I did not follow, was to, when you get that raise every year, because pretty much at where I work, you're getting some bump every spring. You're getting 2 to 4%, say, just somewhere in there, and not treating that as I have 4% more money to spend. Treating that as I was living off of what I already had. Let's pretend that 4% doesn't exist, and either put that straight towards savings, straight towards investment or retirement, and until that number is nice and is a large number that you're not even touching, you're not even thinking about it, because you're living on that smaller number. Like I said, we have not followed that, but I know it's good advice. And sometimes maybe that's the hardest thing especially for young people, but just in general, just to recognize that. Use the good advice. Use the people the guy that told me that was much older than me, much wiser than me, had made the same mistakes that I had made, and done the same things I had, was starting to do, and was trying to save me from the same headaches and the same time that he lost. And of course, in my youthful exuberance, did not listen to that. But so just, I guess I'll throw that out there as another area where I could have done better financially, and maybe we could have done better as a family. Nathan?
Yeah, thanks. Another thing is sometimes living within our means. Something that I think we all know, and we strive to do, but it's also hard to live within those boundaries most of the time, and that could also sometimes impact the financial challenges of marriages. So sometimes you might be tempted to take on additional debt that maybe you could have probably delayed it a little bit before you got to that point. There are, of course, things that makes our life very comfortable and makes it easier, but sometimes we are also not there yet when we pursue those things. And so sometimes you just have to do the hard things that will still keep you afloat, but still make sure you are living within those boundaries to be able to get to that point where you can afford those things. And sometimes balancing those things can be harder, but if we can, it really will help us shave off some of the debts that sometimes we take on and becomes a little bit stressful.
Randy?
None of us are perfect when it comes to these things. None of us are attuned to doing it every month and tracking everything. And certainly, I'm right there with you, brother. But I think it is good to go through that exercise, and maybe we'll have at the end of the quarter here a class period or two where we can talk about what's involved with setting up a spending plan. And it's a good exercise to do, particularly when you're newly married. And it's easier to control those things when children come and it gets more complicated and there's more categories. But setting that up and then doing what was really where it rubber meets the road. It's one thing to build a spending plan, but then most people just set it aside and spend however they want to. But is to do a tracking month every once in a while where you do track every single expense. And those were the fun times, because it becomes like a game. You're trying but to just check it. Hey, did what I put down, is it really match reality? And that's just doing that a couple times. It's not like you have to do that every month, but every year when you get that bonus, when you get the raise too, and then you get a bonus, it going like, okay, here's where it affects our contribution, and that we're going to make those adjustments, and that comes off first, and then here's what's left, and and going through that exercise and being intentional about it. So because it's easy sometimes, and this happened, but I haven't got around to that yet. And it's not just determining what we put in the collection plate. It's also, Jeremy's preached sermons on being ready to give, so that there's something going into a fund that's kind of your budget. That's in the plan too. When an emergency comes up, then, and I don't think that means we're not being. I do believe what Rick said is right. It does. We need to feel it. We're not just giving from our excess all the time. Jesus said, that's fine, but it is good if you're at least planning for it, so that you're ready. I think there's also being ready to go beyond that, I guess, is what I would say is good too. But those are just some little techniques that you can work on together that makes it fun and it's helpful to you.
I think some practical time for the end of the quarter. I think we've got a few classes left. We can go through some of what that looks like as well. Ms. Joanne?
We had some rougher times in the past, and a lot of times they would say, okay, you might not be able to give much, but don't go out to eat and give that money to the Lord. So a lot of us would do that. We would think, okay, this excess that we have, let's give it to the church. Or sometimes my husband would shake hands with somebody and give them a $100 bill. And I know some other people here their husbands were very generous with things. So, times are better now, but back then we had a lot of need.
Sure. All right. That's the end of class. Any other closing comments? Otherwise, we'll let the gaggle in from class. All right. Thank you. That's fine. No, that's fine too. Go ahead. Doesn't matter to me. We'll make sure it's covered.
I'll stall a little bit while Julian is finishing the PowerPoint. He's going to teach us a new song tonight, one that we've been learning. It's becoming a family favorite. It's called When I Go Home, or Get Home. I think it's coming up. Okay. I'll give you a minute.
All right, let's sing a new song. It's called When I Go Home. It should be the next one. Again. Do, do, mi, so, do. In the moment he appears, and the light from heaven shines, I'll forget every fear, every pain I'll leave behind. Then I'll see him as he is, and I'll know him as I'm known. Every tear wiped away when I go. Ever present is the thought that a moment waits for me, when unworthy as I am, His glory I will see. I will empty all my praise before my Father's throne. Every tear wiped away when I go. If the trial I endure and your presence I can't find, be near me, Lord, I pray. Bring back unto my mind that your promises are firm, and I'm never on my own. Every tear wiped away when I go.
The button back there on the console. I just remembered. Anyway, you guys are probably tired of seeing me up here. I was up here teaching class, and I'm up here again. Hey, Julian, could you hit mute group 1 and mute group 2? One light will turn off, one light will turn on. Thank you. So to the right. Reasons because we're not told to celebrate the birth of Christ, right? We're told God is very particular and very instructive when He wants things done a certain way. Maddox and I are reading through the book of Exodus right now. We started in January. We made it all the way to Revelation, and we're back at the beginning, making our way through again. We've just been doing that over and over again for the last few years, just running through the whole Bible from start to finish. And so we're toward the end of Exodus 39 or so maybe, and so it hit me how very particular God is. We were just read through how He wants the tabernacle made, and how as Maddox said, God's favorite colors, blue, purple, and bright red, I think, are the three favorite colors. He's giving me the nod and saying I'm remembering correctly. But just how particular God is. When He wants things done a certain way, and He tells us exactly what He wants. The table of showbread, just all the different parts and pieces that go into that Holy of Holies, that go into how to build the altar, how to consecrate Aaron, how He wants all of his clothes made, and all those things. God is very particular in the Old Testament about exactly what He wants and how He wants it. When it comes to the worship of Him and what we are to do and the things we're supposed to do, how He wants things to look and be made. Jesus is the same way in the New Testament, right? He gives very particular instructions. Here's how you're going to remember me. Here's what that will look like. Here's what you're going to eat. Here's what you're going to drink. Here's the order that they go in. Here's when you're going to do it. Here's who you're going to do it with, right? He is very particular about how He wants to be remembered. And I don't think there's anything wrong with remembering that Jesus was born, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, but at the same time, I think we do that every week because in order to die, raise, and ascend, you have to be born. And so you can't have one without the other. And so while we do not believe that the Scripture tells us how and when to celebrate the birth, we do that every week in that we celebrate His death, burial, and resurrection and ascension. And you can't do those things, as I said, without being born first. And so I know that's not normal for church, I'll quote unquote, for a lot of churches today. They are celebrating, this is a major Catholic holiday, and as our Easter, I think Christmas and Easter are the two most highly attended days of service for a lot of different congregations. And so I wanted to draw attention to that because I think it's a good thing. And at this point, I think is made every Christmas time, right, that there are a lot of people that are thinking about Jesus today. And that's a good thing. That is a blessing. That people are recognizing that Jesus was born. And obviously we recognize He wasn't born today, but this is just a day that people have chosen to remember that. And so that's a good thing, just as Easter, at least that's closer, to a potentially accurate time. And so, again, it's just a good thing that our culture in general recognizes there are significant events around Jesus and that is important. But we recognize that every Sunday when we partake of the Lord's Supper and when we remember His death, burial, and resurrection. And while this is not a Lord's Supper talk, this is an invitation. And so, even though this is maybe lending itself more towards the Lord's Supper talk than an invitation. And through that death, burial, and resurrection, though, that is what gives us that freedom, that ability to follow Him, to do the things that He wants so that we can have the ability to someday go to heaven and be with Him forever. It's because He was born and then He died and was buried and raised and ascended that we can have that opportunity to go to heaven someday. And so while there are lots of people around the world remembering Jesus' birth, we recognize that we do that every Sunday. And so if you want to take the opportunity this evening to put on Christ, to recognize that He died for you, He was born for you, He raised for you, and He ascended to heaven for you, for the things that you have done, for your sins, for my sins, for the things that we do every day that bring us away from Him, but that we can go to Him in prayer and ask for that forgiveness because He sacrificed Himself the way He did. You can do that this evening, and if you have done that already and you've stumbled or you're having trouble and you need prayers from this group, we are a family, and we all love each other very much. We love you. If you would like to come forward this evening, please come to the front now as we stand and sing.
I want to be a worker for the Lord. I want to love and trust His holy word. I want to sing and pray and be busy every day in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray, I will labor every day in the vineyard of the Lord. I want to be a worker, help me, Lord, to lead the lost and erring to thy word. Oh, it points to joys on high, where pleasures never die, in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray, in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray, I will labor every day, in the vineyard of the Lord. I want to be a worker strong and brave. I want to trust in Jesus' power to save. All who will truly come shall find a happy home in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray, in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray, I will labor every day in the vineyard of the Lord.